I had the pleasure of being interviewed by Alex Shaw from the Classic Liberal podcast recently, and he had some great questions for me. Thank you for joining me on the 44th episode of the Lava Spurt, Classical Liberal podcast. This episode is brought to you by Swarm City, a decentralized commerce meta platform that allows people to participate in commerce without interference from a third party.
Welcome to the Lava Spurt, the weekly offshoot of the Lava Flow, channeling the flow of information to the libertarian, anarcho-capitalist, voluntarist, and agorist community. Brought to you by my per-episode donors. Thank you. Here's your host, Roger Paxton.
Alex Shaw of the Classical Liberal podcast asked me to be on his show recently, and we had a great conversation. It's always fascinating to me to be invited to a more minarchist show as a voluntarist, but I will never turn down a speaking spot to spread the ideas of voluntarism and, of course, my podcast. Alex is a great guy, and he does a great podcast, so make sure to check him out, especially if you're a minarchist. The show will start right after these words from our sponsor. This episode of the Lava Flow podcast is brought to you by Swarm City. Swarm City is a decentralized commerce meta platform. What it does is it allows people to participate in commerce, to communicate and transact without interference from a middle party. To give you an example, platforms like Amazon and Uber give global users a safe place to conduct business, but they're centrally organized. And as we all know, central organization is never the most efficient, so these platforms extract a lot of value from the transacting parties, sometimes greater than 25% of each transaction. Swarm City solves this issue by letting people organize, communicate, and transact in a decentralized way. Would you like more info? Stay updated via their Facebook page or join the community on Slack. You can find the link for both of those at the bottom of the website swarm.city.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Classical Liberal podcast. Oh my gosh, ladies and gentlemen, I have a person that I've been wanting to get on the podcast since I've heard his great, gorgeous voice, Roger Paxton. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great, Alex. How are you?
I am doing awfully fine. Now, I'm going to say this because I told a lot of people this when every time I try to tell them, they ask me, hey, what's a good podcast to listen to? I mention the Lava Flow, and I tell them, you're going to listen to Barry White on the mic, so just be ready. Just be ready for that. And they just get excited.
You know, it's funny that you mentioned that because, you know, I hear myself all the time, so I don't hear that. But so many of the comments that I get on Facebook and on, you know, iTunes reviews and stuff mention my, you know, sultry timbre, and I don't get it. But okay, I'll take it. I mean, I love it.
You should take it. You should take it, and you should run with it. You should know
Absolutely.
It. Matter of fact, just go ahead and make a album, make a CD of you just singing random songs. I think everyone.
Oh no, you don't want that. I promise you don't want that.
Well, thank you for coming on the show. For all my listeners, if you guys don't know, this is Roger Paxton from Lava Flow, and you have a crap load of things going on over there. So why don't you just kind of tell the listeners what's going on with you and Lava Flow?
Well, there's so much going on. So I moved here to New Hampshire as part of the Free State Project almost 2 years ago, and have recently started a podcast network. Lava Flow was my first podcast. I started it almost 2 years ago as well. And now I've added the ANCAP Barbershop from a couple of guys down in Alabama. I actually got to meet them at PorkFest this year, which was amazing. We also have the Free Coast Freecast, which is kind of a regional podcast. We have a newer one called Resist the Empire, which is a libertarian view of the Star Wars universe.
That one's great.
I mean, I love it. It is so much fun to do.
I bet. I would love, every time I listen to one of those episodes, I'm like, I would love to hop in on this. Like, I love it.
And, you know, being able to look at of course, Star Wars, I mean, I'm 41 years old. So I was born right at the time that Star Wars, you know, came out in 77. I was born in 76. So it was right at the time when Star Wars was in its heyday. But right now we live in the best time in the history of the world to be a Star Wars fan. So to be able to do a podcast about Star Wars and libertarian politics together, it's so much fun. But, you know, what we do is we take the Star Wars news, tell you about that, but then we take different pieces of Star Wars and talk about it from a libertarian perspective. We pick a character every week and we talk about that character using the galaxy's smallest political quiz, which is our take on the world's smallest political quiz, with some Star Wars, stuff stuck into the quiz. And we rate them on the political spectrum, just like you would with the world's smallest political quiz. So we have so much fun with that show.
Oh, man. It's really good, guys. You guys have really got to go check it out. Now, I know that you're I always say it wrong. Anarcho-capitalist. Sorry, I had to say that really slowly for my little mind to get it.
Well, I am, but that's just a label. The title Lava for the Lava Flow is libertarian, anarcho-capitalist, voluntarist, agorist, and I'm a little bit of all of those. Anarcho-capitalist and voluntarist are pretty much the same thing. We believe in voluntary interaction with other people, and that includes government as well. The government should be voluntary if it's going to exist at all. And I submit that if the government is voluntary, it's no longer government, but that's a different story. And the agorist is, kind of counter economics, gray and black market type dealings, and of course, libertarian kind of encompasses all of that.
So you're not like one of those anarchists that are just like no government whatsoever. People can do their own things in their own tribal ways or in their own little areas. Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, I believe that government is force, and I believe that force is immoral. So I believe that government would be immoral. Now, I believe that people can voluntarily bind together, create rules for themselves. It would be semi-government-like, but it wouldn't be government because government requires force to exist. But I see no issue with people creating rules for themselves.
See, and that's where like a lot of, at least with me, I get kind of confused on that view. Because as a classical liberal, a newly found kind of, drunk the water from the fountain and whatnot, and I was just like, I'm more of a classical liberal, but I do agree that there is too much government, there's too many people forcing things onto people, but I don't necessarily agree that there needs to be no government at all. And like when I think of an anarchist, I think of someone who just completely doesn't believe in government whatsoever.
Well, anarchist does mean no government. That's right. What the root of those words mean. Mm-hmm. So, technically that's what it is. I think of rules, when I say rules, I think of rules more like a housing, when you're in a neighborhood and you have, I can't think of the word I'm looking for, but when you have different houses in the neighborhood and you make rules for that area, housing association, that's kind of what I think of as rules, voluntary rules that you can either agree to or not. But if you don't agree to those rules and you don't get the privileges of being a part of that neighborhood or a part of that club or whatever the case may be. So I think that, rules without force is absolutely appropriate and moral, but and therefore there would be no government because government does require force because it does require submission. It does require being a part and following their rules. Otherwise, it's not a government.
But how can society actually function without those rules in place? Without someone saying, "Hey, guy, we all have to mow our lawns, in this period of time. Let's make sure we get it done so our community to be the best." And that's one of the rules we enforce. How can there not be any rules of enforcement to get people to do things?
Well, nobody tells me to mow my lawn. I live in a neighborhood where there are no such rules, and we don't live in chaos. We don't live in squalor. I have a very nice home, and
all the gnomes are going through your yard. They're loving everything about it.
Right. But I mow my yard because I like a nice yard, not because somebody else has to force that on me. But if my neighbor, chose not to, that's on them. And if it did encroach on the values of my property or the values of the neighborhood or the area, then we could seek redress of grievances for that. If that happened to be the case, if we could prove that, his unmaintenance of his yard did cause some devaluation of our property. I think that those are the better ways to handle that other than saying, hey, if you don't mow your yard, then I'm going to call the cops, and the cops are going to come and they're going to bring guns with them and they're going to give you a ticket. And if you don't go to court for that ticket, then they're going to come back and they're going to try to take you to jail with their guns. And if you don't want to go with them, they're going to shoot you. Oh. I don't think that that's appropriate.
Please don't shoot me for not mowing my lawn.
Well, but every government edict, every law is backed up with the force of a gun eventually if you refuse to bow down to it. And that's the reality of the situation.
See, and so are you basically trying to say that society, in fact, well, let's do it this way. Modern society can, in fact, go away without government.
I think
it can do away without it.
I think any society could. Ireland for 9,000 years was anarchist. There was no government for 9,000 years in Ireland, and they flourished just fine. They survived just fine. And that was pre, modern society by 1,000 years. So I think that it's clearly worked in the past. It could clearly work in the future. It's clearly better than the force that we have in today's society for literally everything that you do, from flushing the toilet in the morning to, whatever the case may be. I mean, I have a septic tank, so when I flush my toilet, it's regulated by the city. When, I drive my car, it's regulated by the state. Literally everything you do is regulated in some way.
So with the government, what is government supposed to do then? So say, because honestly, I do not think that in our time, at least, that kind of idea will succeed. That won't come to fruition. But what is government with the current political system? What is it supposed to do right now for us if we had to have government?
Well, I think the founding fathers, if you look at a lot of their writings, most of the founding fathers believed that the only valid use of government was to protect individual liberties. And that worked for, maybe 6 months. but I mean, literally, you had the Alien and Sedition Acts. Well, how many years? 2 years after the Constitution was ratified? I mean, it was clear that the Constitution, like Lysander Spooner said, either authorized such a government as we have now, or it authorized it. It either authorized it or it allowed it to exist. And in either way, the Constitution is unfit to exist. And I submit that the government itself is unfit to exist because it is using that force.
Okay. I don't know. I guess maybe it's my millennial mindset. I just can't get past not needing a government.
Well, it's funny because I was just at PorcFest a couple of weeks ago, and it was the younger generation that was more anarchist. Some of the older generation was more of the minarchists who, were set in their ways and, believed that we should have a little bit of government here and there. Mm-hmm. But you would be amazed at the millennial generation coming up, and even the generation past that. We had teenagers there, talking 15, 16, 17 years old, who were just incredibly bright and incredibly anarchist, and they are our future, and I can't wait to see it.
And so New Hampshire, you always talk about how that's the freest state in the United States. How so? Well, I know a lot of people don't hear that, but what's up?
Well, several lists show that. Cato does their Freedom in the 50 States every year, and this year New Hampshire was on top. And I believe that it'll be on top again next year because we've done so much already this year. We've had added constitutional carry, decriminalization of marijuana, deregulation completely across the board of cryptocurrency, education freedom. I mean, we've had just success after success after success this year, not to mention three elected state representatives have switched parties from Republican and Democrat to the Libertarian Party of New Hampshire, where I'm the vice chair. So we have more Libertarian sitting state reps than all the other 49 states combined. We have the only Libertarian caucus in the state house in the country right now.
Now that was awesome. When I saw that article about that, actually, I was shocked, and I keep wondering myself, do you think they're going to be able to win their re-election? The fact that they switched.
It'll be tough. There's no question about that. I think that at least one of them, we have a really good shot because he's well known in the area. He's lived there his whole life. And he won not because he was running as a Republican, but because he went door to door and did the work. I think that he's got a really good shot. The other two, I'm just honestly not sure of. But, we've got to start somewhere. And I think that this is the place to start.
Now, is that an effective thing for representatives, whether it's in state or whatever federal, is for them to move to the Libertarian Party from their own, so abandon their old party to move to the Libertarian Party? Is that really effective for us, rather than having an actual Libertarian from the get-go and get elected in office?
Well, so we didn't have that opportunity in New Hampshire until recently. We elected Libertarians in the 90s, and then the state house changed the rules, basically raising the bar. So we went from, I think, 2% to now 4% to being able to remain on the ballot. We did reach that 4% with a gubernatorial candidate in 2016, and that's why now we're, again, a viable party for the first time in 20 years. And that's what allowed these libertarians, these principled, consistent libertarians, and one of them is actually an anarchist libertarian, to come over to the party where they belonged in the first place. And now that we have that ballot access, we've got a good shot. I mean, we've got, over 2,000, almost 2,100 libertarians who've moved to this state as part of the Free State Project, who are active on the ground working their tail off. We've got another 2,500 to 2,800 in the state who are, quote, friends of the Free State Project, people who are natives who live here, who agree with our mission and are, in work with us. So we have the biggest concentration of libertarians on the ground per capita in the world. and we're making change with that.
Huh. Interesting. Now, what do you think about the Austin Peters move? I know this past week, of course, everybody, this is pre-recorded, so last week for you guys, Austin Peters basically switched. He said he's going to leave the Libertarian Party, did a whole giant, gave us a letter and speech and all that stuff, and went to the Republican Party. What's your view on that?
Well, to be fair, I don't think much of Austin Peterson. I try not to think about him because, I knew from the get-go that he was not a libertarian. Anybody who can stand up there and say that the non-aggression principle is stupid and childish, which are literally words that he said, I think that you can't stand up and say that and be a libertarian. So I don't believe he's a libertarian to begin with. He's a classic conservative, quote, conservative. So he's a perfect fit for the Republican Party. He's just like Wayne Allen Root. I don't know if any of your listeners will remember Wayne Allen Root. But, in the 2008 election, he was the vice presidential candidate, made big waves in the Libertarian Party. He's a Republican conservative conservative libertarian, and he's going to, be great in our party. And then he got fed up because he was around a bunch of libertarians who didn't like him. So he switched back to the Republicans. And I think that that's exactly what's happening with Austin Peterson.
And I wrote this question down, and I kind of knew that I always put pre-assumptions, which you might say. I kind of thought you would say no, that you didn't like.
Right. Well, I made it pretty clear on my show because I followed the presidential race pretty closely. And my two guys were Darryl Perry, who's a very good friend of mine. He's actually the chairman of the Libertarian Party of New Hampshire. And my other guy was John McAfee. I wanted one of those two guys to win because they were actual principled libertarians.
And John McAfee, he actually lives near me, and lives close near me, and I'm actually having a meeting with him pretty soon. So he's a good guy.
That's awesome. Yeah, he's actually lives about 20 minutes from where my wife was from in Tennessee. So yeah, I was actually from that area too, a couple hours away, close to Memphis. So
yeah, I really didn't know who he was until I started researching him. And I was like, everything started, all the wheels started to click, and I was like, okay, this is really cool.
Well, the thing I liked about John McAfee was kind of what drew Judd Weiss to John McAfee is that he's just cool. And he's a principled libertarian. Right. So I'll take just on the case that he's a principled libertarian that he was a good fit for the presidential nomination. But he's just a cool dude. He's lived an incredible life. He's been through all kinds of crazy stuff. And, anybody who loves their guns as much as him has got to be a pretty cool dude.
Now, back to the Austin Peterson and switching parties. What does that signal to you? I know Larry Sharpe, he went on to another podcast or kind of video cast, and he discussed that the Libertarian Party doesn't seem very inviting, which there we will lose, since Libertarian Party is not that inviting, we lose those great candidates. Now, if someone is switching from Libertarian to Republican, but they still have those same values, should we still consider them an ally, or consider them someone that we should give our votes to versus someone who's running under the Libertarian Party banner?
Generally, I would say yes. Obviously, Ron Paul was an ally to the Libertarian Party.
Right.
But Austin Peterson, who is against the main principle that makes us libertarians, says it is stupid. He's not an ally. I'm sorry. There's no way that somebody who can, shoot all over our main principle, there's no way somebody like that can be an ally. Now, I know Austin Peterson. I've met him several times. He's a nice guy. I don't have anything against him personally, but he's not a libertarian. But there are several Republicans who, especially here in New Hampshire, where we have elected several dozen Free State Project libertarians to the state house as Republican and Democrat. Of course, now we have a Libertarian Party here that's active and actually making some change. But we've elected several libertarians here in other parties, and I absolutely consider them allies.
It's just because it's always great to ask people about what they think about switches and things like that, because I'm starting, maybe I was late because I just joined the Libertarian Party in Tennessee and I just got more involved in the liberty movement. Maybe I'm late in seeing it, but trying to understand why a lot of these people that are in the leadership are so eyeballing these people who are switching over and back and forth. It kind of makes me weary because I didn't really see Republicans switch to Democrat. I mean, I saw a few, but nothing like how many people are switching now in the Libertarian Party, whether it's from Republican to Libertarian or Libertarian to Republican. So I don't know. I'm lost on that.
My issue here is that the Libertarian, you mentioned it not being inviting, or Larry Sharpe mentioned that it's not inviting. And I think that there are some libertarians who are like that. And some of them are hardcore anarchists, people that I know and love. I believe that the party itself, the Libertarian Party, should be a big tent. We should allow everybody to come into the party that wants to come into the party, and we should then help them become more libertarian. If they choose not to become more libertarian, then we should just turn our back and eventually they'll leave, like Wayne Root, like Austin Peterson. But we need to be that party that lets those people in. But we don't need to run those people as candidates. It's just like the old adage, invite the whore to church, but don't have her preaching the next Sunday. You know, I mean, we need the whore to come to church because she needs to learn, you know, not to be a whore. but at the same time, we don't want her preaching from the pulpit the next week because she has to get to that point. And I think that that's where the Libertarian Party should be. A lot of anarchists see it differently, and I disagree with them.
So, about 2 more questions for you about the Libertarian Party. So, you've been working in it for a while. You've been a chairman. You were a secretary. I believe that was in Arkansas, right?
Yeah, I was started off as a first district rep, then I was a chairman for 2 terms, and then secretary. When my wife became chairman, we wanted to keep it in the family.
So now that you've been inside the leadership, well, at least the local leadership, how is that? Like, how from being inside leadership, and looking at the national leadership, is your mind changing to where you might think you might have to step up, or are you thinking of other leaders having to step up, pushing other people to step up? Because at least for me, you know, I'm just a classical liberal, so a lot of people get mad. They're, oh, you're just conservatarian and stuff like that. So a lot of people get mad at me about that. But I see just a crap load of leadership nationally that are shit. They're just not doing what they're supposed to do. They're not running like an actual party. They're running like a gang of idiots, to be honest.
And I don't disagree with that. I've been asked to run for the national LP on several occasions, and I refused to do it. As a matter of fact, when Johnson and Weld were elected, I resigned my membership from the National Party, and I resigned my lifetime membership with the Libertarian Party of Arkansas. I was already in New Hampshire, but I still had a lifetime membership there, and I resigned that membership because I was disgusted with the lack of principles that this party held. Again, it goes back to, you know, putting people as candidates who are not libertarians, which I think is a terrible, terrible thing to do because they're not doing the main thing that libertarian candidates should be doing, which is spreading libertarianism and this libertarian ideal. But as you mentioned, the leadership, I have zero respect for the Libertarian National Committee. Nick Sarwark is a personal friend of mine. I love Nick Sarwark. I disagree with how he's running the party vehemently. I love Arvin Vohra. Arvin Vohra has been here to New Hampshire twice when we've had Republicans and Democrats switch over to our party and you know, been to our press conferences. Nick Sarwark came to the last one. But the way that the party is being run right now, the way that the LNC refused to admonish our candidates for Bill Weld, for example, for being anti-gun, you know, some of his anti-gun rhetoric, and the LNC just standing there and taking it and not saying a word. The LPC Coast, which is one of our affiliates here that I'm a member of, we sent to Patrick McKnight, our LNC representative, we sent him a letter saying, hey, we want the LNC to censor Bill Weld for these anti-gun statements. He refused. And I'm sorry, but if the LNC is not going to stand up for principles, then it's no longer the party of principle.
And I always thought Gary Johnson and Bill Weld was a terrible choice from the get-go. I mean, honestly, I never believed that Gary Johnson was a libertarian. I kind of thought he just wanted to try to get power,
sure,
and try to gain that, you know. That
well, he was more
stage.
Yeah, I mean, he was more libertarian than Bill Weld, of course, but he was still not a libertarian. I mean, it's like somebody asked me on Lions of Liberty a couple of weeks ago. I was on their show. Somebody asked me who's more libertarian, Donald Trump or Gary Johnson. And I said it's like asking me who's the most black, because I mean, one can be a little bit darker than the other, or whatever, but there's a difference in being a little bit dark and then being black. It's the same way with being a little bit libertarian, but that doesn't mean that you're a libertarian just because you have some libertarian ideals. I mean, even President Obama had some libertarian ideals.
Right.
You know, he was anti several things that libertarians are anti on, and so. But does that mean that Obama was a libertarian? Of course not. And just like Johnson is no libertarian either.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, Roger Paxton, everyone, thank you for coming on. You have any final words to say for listeners?
Well, thanks for having me on, Alex. It's been a pleasure, of course, and you know, definitely check out all the stuff that I'm doing at PaxLibertas.com or thelavaflow.com or ResistTheEmpirePodcast.com, and you know, hit me up and tell me what you want to hear from us, and we'll add some more podcasts. And if anybody's looking to do a new podcast and they just don't know where to get started or don't know any of that, just shoot me an email at roger@PaxLibertas.com and we'll get you started.
Well, thank you for tuning in, ladies and gentlemen. Roger back as always, vocal and very white sounding as always. Thank you for tuning in, ladies and gentlemen. We'll see you guys next week. Stay classy.
Thanks, guys, for listening to the show, and make sure to check out the Classical Liberal podcast on any podcatcher. A big thanks to Alex Shaw for having me on his show. Until next time, keep striking the root.
Thank you for listening to The Lava Flow at thelavaflow.com. Don't miss an episode. Subscribe now at thelavaflow.com/subscribe. This has been a Pax Libertas Productions podcast.